Astronaut Major Tim Peak, who's inspired a generation of space lovers. He became the first British astronaut to work on board the International Space Station and, of course, take that walk in space.
Well, after releasing his best-selling autobiography, Limitless, he's now hoping for another mission to space and the possibility of becoming the first Brit to step foot on the moon. And Major Peake joins us now. Well, good morning to you.
Good morning. Great to join you on the show this morning.
We've just spent 10 minutes talking about tormented, damaged geniuses. And there's you, an astronaut, every little boy's dream. And there's nothing damaged about you, is there, Peake? You're almost perfect.
Well, I hope not. I certainly was a little bit damaged when I first came back from space, but it's amazing, you know, how quickly the body recovers. So hopefully I'm
that's
all
really
back
interesting because I was watching you actually on the Graham Norton show and you revealed this extraordinary thing, that when you were up there for 6 months, you actually grew by 2 inches.
2 inches.
Tell us about that.
You do. Yeah, well, I mean, as soon as you go into weightlessness, it's this really liberating experience. But all the ligaments and the muscles in your back relax, and so your spine stretches. So we all grow a little bit, which is fantastic. And actually, some people get backache when they're first in space for the first couple of weeks. But of course, we get crushed back down to shape as soon as we return to Earth.
So you went from 5'8", which is, I think, your normal height, to 5'10".
Yeah, yeah, and our seats are actually made for, you know, for that growth when we return in the Soyuz spacecraft, because our seats are due to protect us for the re-entry and the landing, not for the launch. So our seats have to be stretched a little bit, knowing that we're going to grow in space.
And Major Tim Peake, we've just been talking about the people who are able to kind of screw their courage to the sticking mast and do something which is potentially really quite frightening. And frankly, going into space is one of the most daunting things that you could possibly imagine doing. You even had to write notes, didn't you, for your children in case something happened, and they were left just with letters talking about who you were, you know, what you wanted them to remember about you. That is quite an emotional experience, I can imagine.
It was a hugely emotional experience, and I think it's the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. And I think throughout the ages, you know, any people who go off and explore or do a high-risk activity, you're always weighing up the risk versus the benefit. And it's something I'm passionate about. It's who I am. So I've always been like that, whether I was test flying Apache helicopters or whether I was, you know, launching to space. So I think it's important to be honest about who you are and not shy away from that. And that sets an example to your children as well. But of course, you know, I wanted them to be prepared in case anything had happened. So I wanted them to have something to remember me by. But it's a hugely emotional thing, saying goodbye to your children when you know you're putting yourself in harm's way. But as I said, I think it's something you have to do.
And there's also something that I hadn't realised was because you're up there on the International Space Station for 6 months, and you'd served, of course, in the military as well. And you say that when you're in the military and something goes wrong, God forbid, at home, the military can get you home within a sort of 24-hour time frame. So you can be with your wife or your children or your family if something went wrong and you needed to be there. When you're on the space station, you are there for 6 months. You are not going to be able to get back in an emergency. And that, I can imagine, that's an extra element to the claustrophobia and disconnection.
It certainly is, yeah, and it's a huge commitment, and you go there knowing that, and your family go there knowing that. So you make contingency plans if anything should happen to either yourself or your family. But it's a huge commitment, and for me, that was again the hardest part about being in space, was worrying about my family back home and hoping that, you know, nothing happened to them. And we do have great connection with our family. We're able to call them, and once a week we have a video call, so I was able to see my children and interact, and that connection back to home and back to planet Earth is so important for, you know, mental well-being when you're in an isolated environment. As everybody's learning this year, you know, we want to be in touch with our loved ones, but certainly, you know, having that connection was fantastic to be able to do that on the space station.
Tim, that moment when you're first up there, right up there, and you look back down at us, we can all dream about what that must be like. You've actually done it. But the very first moment you look down, what is that experience like?
It's incredible. The very first moment I did that was from the Soyuz spacecraft shortly after we'd been inserted into orbit. And you've just had this overwhelming experience launching into space, the incredible acceleration. You're traveling at 17,500 miles per hour. And then everything is quiet and you're floating, and it's very serene, very calm, very beautiful. And you look out the window and you see the Earth beneath you. And it's that sense of detachment, detachment from your home planet. But also, you're very aware that you're outside of Earth's atmosphere. You're not experiencing the Earth's gravity. You could be heading off on a distant mission somewhere else in the solar system. It's an amazing feeling, and the Earth is just so beautiful, set against the backdrop, the black universe, and that is a stunning view to see for the first time.
You also had another stunning view, didn't you? Because you thought you'd seen a UFO. Flickering past you, and you got all excited, right to the point you realised exactly what it was that you'd seen.
Absolutely. This was to the end of the mission, and so I was quite experienced about what you should see and what you shouldn't see in space. And I saw 3 lights flying in formation in the daytime, and the only time you see a light in space in the daytime is if it's another spacecraft coming towards you. So I called over my NASA crewmate Jeff Williams, and we had a look at this and couldn't work it out. And then we finally realized that it was Russian urine that was leaking from the Progress vehicle, and it was crystallizing and reflecting the light back at us. So it wasn't quite the first contact experience that we'd been hoping for.
Now, we have all these questions, which, we think are good journalistic questions and stuff. But the truth is, everywhere you go, particularly younger people, kids, they just want to know one thing about life in space, and it involves your bodily fluids. Just spit it out.
It certainly does, and I always start with that as an opener when I go and speak to schools and universities, because it's like, let's get the bodily functions out the way. But what I find fascinating is that that's what they're most interested in. People are most interested just about how would you live in space? How can you sleep? How can you eat? And the amazing thing, actually, about the space station loo is not how we go to the loo. That's just airflow that keeps everything kind of going in the right direction. It's the fact that your urine gets turned into drinking water in less than 24 hours, and we recycle about 90% of it.
Really?
Yeah, we're doing amazing work on the space station about sustainability, trying to make it.
And do you always get your own, or do you?
Can you choose?
Sorry, this is a really important question.
Experience.
You don't know whose you're getting.
You don't know who's you're getting, and what's worse, we actually take the Russian urine and we throw it through our recycling system as well, so it's a free-for-all.
We have somebody very excited here, who's Laura Tobin, our meteorologist, who is a NASA geek, has actually been there, done it. She would love to be you, basically. So, Laura, we've got the great man with us. I know you would love to ask him a question.
I know, there's so many questions. Yeah,
I try not to make it too geeky, Laura.
I promise. I met Laurel O'Hara at the Johnson Space Centre earlier this year to talk to her about the Artemis mission and sat in the Orion module, so that was really exciting. But I guess one question you must get asked a lot, but it's a funny one, is what is the most expensive thing you have broken in space?
Oh, God. I tell you, the most expensive thing I was certainly worried about breaking was losing something on a spacewalk. It's so easy to make a mistake when you're outside the space station. You've got these really expensive tools that are very bespoke. There's only one of them, and you're using them. Everything has to be tethered, and I was terrified about, forgetting to tether one of the tools or just watching it float off into space. But thankfully, I made a few mistakes on the space station, but thankfully they weren't too important or too expensive.
The last time I saw you, Tim, was actually at the memorial service for Sir Stephen Hawking. And it was an amazing day, beautiful sunny day. They were playing Vangelis, and it was just an amazing thing. He spoke to us, the great professor from Beyond the Grave, and this amazingly powerful moment that we all witnessed and stuff. And he obviously was this great trailblazer, discovered the black holes and so on. It's a big world out there, and it's not our world, isn't it? When you actually get into the weeds of just how big the rest of existence is, it's quite staggering, isn't it?
It's absolutely staggering. I had the huge privilege of speaking to Stephen Hawking from the space station and his daughter Lucy. And it was such a memorable call. I took them on a tour of the space station, and we just sat in the cupola window, and I pointed the camera out, and we just talked whilst we were orbiting Earth. But yes, I mean, it's a vast universe. And when you see the scale of it from space, it really puts it into perspective, you know, how tiny we are against this backdrop.
A final question, Tim. You're going to the moon, aren't you? It's going to be you. I can feel it.
I think it's time the Union flag went out there, certainly.
Yes,
went beyond low Earth.
yes, we need you planting. You'd have to be a bit careful with the language now. You'd have to say one small step for a person, one giant leap for peoplekind.
Humankind.
You couldn't get all gender specific. You realise that?
Absolutely, I'll get that rehearsed.
Major Peake, it's a brilliant book. It's called Limitless. I could honestly talk. We could all talk to you all day. It's fascinating. It's, you know, you're one of the great explorers this country's ever produced. We're very proud of you. Thank you for all that you do. And if you go to the moon, what an amazing thing that will be. So best of luck with the book.
Thank you so much. Great joining you. Thank you.
Great to see you.